Let's move over, before we leave the floor for questions, to the issue of how to fight ISIS efficiently. I mean, we've had bomb campaigns for a year now, but they're still there. Mm-hmm. They're holding territory. Mm-hmm. What would be the more efficient way to curb them?
I mean, I think that where Western policy has got us to is a very difficult situation, where it's hard to pull back and it's dangerous to go forward, and standing still is simply not an option either. So it's a set of real dilemmas around what to do. So I think nobody should think that there is an easy solution. Personally, I think that the increase in the bombing campaign that came in the latter part of last year, I understand it emotionally, psychological reaction to the events in Paris, but as a rational, strategic action, no, I don't think it's viable. There was a report that came out at least I saw it in British newspapers at the very end of the year, that after all the fuss and the noise in Britain about taking the decision to stand firm with our French allies and bomb ISIS in Syria, that a total of 3 bombing raids had been carried out in the first month of deploying the Royal Air Force into that operation. There's not the targets to bomb. They're not that easy to acquire and find. There's all kinds of difficulties now as well, with the Russians also occupying the airspace. I guess there is some kind of informal agreement where they manage not to trip over each other, because if it weren't for that, we would have many more situations like when the Turkish fighter shot down the Russian plane. So I don't think that thinking you can pile on the military pressure from the air is going to work. There are those, and I respect the opinion, who say it must be a military and political solution combined. So you have to have the armed option, but, in the view of some, then it's got to include troops on the ground, which I think no European capital, and also nor in Washington, is anybody going to go for.
They have to be local.
They have to be local. So this is why in the debate in the House of Commons, David Cameron came up with a figure of 70,000 anti-ISIS forces whom we could be supporting and fighting with. But the background briefings gave no confidence about that figure whatsoever. So the military option seems to me to be clearly limited. Rather, let me put it this way. The military option which Western governments seem willing to utilize is clearly of limited effect. The one that might be of more serious effect, they seem unwilling to go for. So then you move towards the political and the financial measures. Everything that can be done to restrict financing support for ISIS needs to be done. That includes hitting the oil trade, and it includes hitting the flow of funds into Syria. That must also include then cooperation on the Turkish-Syria border to that end. I think you've also got to look longer term at the recruitment cycle. But as I said, it's a very tiny minority of people who are really drawn to ISIS.
Are we sort of overestimating their impact because we give them so much attention in our media?
I don't think so. I've thought about that quite a lot. I mean, in terms of the impact of the Paris attack, I mean, it's for real. And if people feel differently about the city in which they live, that is hardly surprising. But the numbers are really quite small. I mean, the UK figures are that 800 have gone to Syria from Britain, of whom 400 have come back, and 600 have been prevented. Across the whole of Europe, it's some thousands who are thought to have gone, of whom many have come back. These are very, very small proportions of the total. And trying to guard against that in the way that is now being discussed is leading sometimes to perfectly surreal situations. I don't know if you saw this story in today's papers in Britain. A kid, a 10-year-old, was interviewed. He'd written in a paper in school, writing an essay, I live in a terrorist house. He was misunderstanding, mishearing, and misspelling the word terraced, which means, you know, a row of houses connected to each other. So he wanted to write, I live in a terraced house. And instead he wrote, I live in a terrorist house. The law says the teachers must report that.
Oh.
That's what the law says. Right? So the teacher was not reacting disproportionately. I mean, you know, yes, sure, actually, probably a sensible teacher would have said, oh, you know, come here and learn how to write the word properly. But in fact, it was reported, and the police went and called on the family, and you know, to find out about this terrorist house. So I just don't think it works, and it doesn't work for the kind of society that we want to have, that we want to live in. I don't see that it's a successful way of preventing ISIS if we turn ourselves inside out and upside down in order to, in the name of a war on ISIS. But nonetheless, something needs to be done that restricts this flow of people to Syria and away, because we have seen that they are capable of inflicting an awful lot of misery both within Syria and then at home when they come back. And I think that, I mean, also I think a huge or much bigger effort can be made to take down to take down ISIS on social media. There could be much more done to prevent that from happening.
Last summer, Tony Blair's former advisor, Jonathan Powell, was in Sweden, in Almedalen, talking about his book, Talking to Terrorists. And this is his line of thought, that you have to do it ultimately because they're there. And of course, there is silent diplomacy in many cases. Do you think that there is such silent diplomacy going on, talking to ISIS?
I would not be at all surprised. There was with Hamas and Hezbollah at times when the language about both those organizations was as extreme as we now hear about ISIS, thinking about them in the same terms. And I know for sure, because I talked to people who were doing it, that there were contacts being had. I would imagine that, yes, indeed, there are contacts with ISIS from different sources and through different governments, because governments and government agencies, and probably ISIS, like to keep options open. And you only keep options open if you keep doors open ajar so that you can communicate and you can see what's on the other side. So I don't know for a fact, but I would not be at all surprised to find out.